Hello everyone. This is essentially my return video. I've had a lot of issues in terms of recording and finding stuff that would work. Um, but yeah, I'm back. So today we're going to be going over the new 538 Senate predictions and what I agree with and what I don't. Essentially, the Senate right now looks like basically an even split. This is essentially a statistical tie. Um, Of course, there's been some updates since I last uploaded, such as Roe v. Wade getting overturned. That was a big one. There was the Supreme Court smackdown New York's gun laws. Arizona recently, essentially, I don't want to say defederalized, but essentially said whatever money is in your taxes for schools, you can take that to whatever school you want. Um, and so there's a lot of new things that have happened. And so I'm going to be going over what 538 is and what I agree with and what I don't. So let's get into it. So yeah, so immediately off the bat, they're telling you there's 21 Republican seats up for election and 14 Democrat seats up for election. Now, this is automatically a good thing for Democrats because, I mean, Republicans have been expected to win the popular vote or at least tie for a while now. Now, Democrats are pretty much ahead of Republicans in most polls up until Biden pulled out of Afghanistan. And since then, Biden's had terrible approval ratings, and the Democrats have been trailing the Republicans by around 2% on the generic ballot. So here you see essentially the 2020 map, but there is a few changes. So we're going to start from the least competitive, I guess, swing states to the most competitive swing states. And so starting off, we're going to go to a state that should not be in the swing state category, but it somehow is, which is Missouri. And I mean this not as in, oh, well, Missouri's not competitive and shouldn't be listed as swing state. No, I mean it shouldn't be competitive at all, and yet it is competitive. That is mostly because Eric Greitens is likely going to be the Republican nominee in Missouri, and he is terribly unpopular there among independents and moderate Republicans, which is now the center of Missouri's state, essentially. And that means that the Democratic nominee, whoever that may be, will likely gain almost all Democrats and at least 60% or so of those traditional swing voters. However, Missouri is still a very red state, so of course it's still going to be Republican, which is essentially a very similar story in one of the other states, which is Ohio. In Ohio, Democrat Tim Ryan basically cruised to a victory, and that's because no one else ran against him because he's the only one who can win. He's the only Democrat in that state whose realistic chance of winning. It used to be a swing state like Missouri, and like Missouri is now trending very reliably red. Now, J.D. Vance is kind of like Eric Greens. He's very unpopular. This is mostly due to the fact that despite being essentially a less Trumpy candidate than Josh Mandel or some of the other candidates who ran, Vance still got the Trump endorsement, which really splintered the Republican primary, allowing Vance to win. But Vance only won with around 30% of the vote. Additionally, Tim Ryan has a certain Ohio-ness, I guess, about him, whereas J.D. Vance has been attacked by a lot of people in the race as someone who comes from Hollywood and big media. So I still think this is a red state, as I previously said, but polls in Ohio have essentially shown, despite 538's 84% chance, polls have essentially shown that Ryan is at least even right now. Now, I think the Republican vote, the Trump vote, will consolidate around Vance, and Vance will still win, but it might be a lot closer than people previously expected. For Democrats, there's not many competitive races outside of the true swing races. I mean, maybe there's a shocker in Washington, maybe shocker in Colorado, but for the most part, those incumbents are safe. But getting to incumbents who aren't safe, we have Maggie Hassan in New Hampshire. Now, New Hampshire used to be a reliable swing state, but despite having a very ethnically white population, that would put you in the Republican category for the most part. But New Hampshire is one of those New England white states. So they have a Republican governor, Republican legislature, completely dominated Republicans. But they're moderate, which means that when push comes to shove, if a Trumpish candidate wins the primary, it's going to be a walkover for Maggie Hassan. That said, right now, 538 is giving Hassan a 70% chance. I think that's correct. I don't think that Hassan can really hope for more than that. We come to Florida next. I think Florida realistically isn't competitive. Democrats love to say, well, Florida is a swing state, so, it can happen, but no, it's not. Not only is it a red swing state at best, if not just a red state at this point, it swung even further towards Trump between 2016 and 2020, one of only a few states to do that. The others being California and Hawaii, which don't really count because they're so blue, and Utah, which of course had an independent candidate there who won a sizable part of the vote in 2016. So realistically, this was Trump's only large swing towards him in a state. And additionally, Ron DeSantis, the governor's popularity will ensure that Rubio wins this race. I think realistically, he might even get 55, 56% of it. Next, we come to Wisconsin. Now, Wisconsin's an interesting state because it's supposed to be a swing state and it's supposed to vote like Pennsylvania, and yet here we see essentially a far right Trump full-in supporter, and he's probably going to win against whoever the Democratic nominee is. I think Democrats can maybe turn it around if they somehow manage to fix gas prices, inflation, etc., but I realistically do not see Democrats winning Wisconsin. Now we come to North Carolina. North Carolina was big news because Ted Budd, a congressman there, beat out another Republican candidate in the primary simply by being endorsed by Trump. He realistically was getting destroyed in the polls and skyrocketed to the top after Trump endorsed him. That means that he can essentially claim to be Trump's legacy, and in a state where Trump won in the year when Democrats are expected to do tremendously bad, I think Ted Budd easily wins this. Which means that there's realistically a maximum of 51 seats that Democrats can win, if you include Bernie Sanders' seat in Vermont and Angus King's seat in Maine, which are two independents who caucus with the Democrats. And so we start right here. We're going to start in the state of Arizona. Now, Arizona has a relatively popular incumbent Democrat, and he's running against a Trump-endorsed, relatively popular-ish Republican candidate, or likely will be the Republican candidate, Blake Masters. I think Masters has essentially a much worse shot in the aftermath of the bill that was just signed in Arizona, which said that parents can essentially take their tax money anywhere. This means that essentially the overwhelmingly poor Latinx community and the African American community, the Native American community, all of those groups are now going to be stuck in schools because they are not going to be able to get transportation to other places as easily as the overwhelmingly richer white population in Arizona. So what does this bill mean essentially? Well, I think it consolidates Latinos behind Kelly, and I think that it maybe gives a few more white votes to Masters. That said, Masters was already overwhelmingly winning the white vote, whereas Kelly was not as much overwhelmingly winning the Latino vote. So I do think that Kelly will win this race, maybe 60-40% chance right now. Now we start to get into the really close races. There's three left. So we first have in Georgia. Georgia is realistically the easiest flip for Republicans. They have Herschel Walker, who is a very weak candidate with numerous scandals against him, but he's running against an unpopular incumbent in Raphael Warnock in a state where Trump almost won, and Republicans are supposed to do around 5 points better in generic ballot. So I think Herschel Walker could win this by at least 1%. I think if Republicans had nominated a better candidate, then maybe Republicans would have this 60-40. But no, I think that Herschel Walker is a very weak candidate, even if what he says might resonate with the Republican primary base, it's not resonating with the overwhelming majority of Georgians. In Pennsylvania, my home state, John Fetterman is supposed to roughly tie Oz. It's going to be within a point, says 538. And it's essentially a statistical tie. However, there's something a lot of people aren't talking about, which is the fact that before Mastriano was clearly like the nominee and the Republican primary had consolidated, people said, "Oh yeah, Democrats 36% chance," and then they took some polls and realized, wait a second, Fetterman has won every poll. Fetterman literally had like a stroke and has been in the hospital, unable to campaign. It's an open field, and Oz has failed to take the lead. In fact, getting killed in some polls, like 50 to 44%. Like Fetterman literally needs to win 0 more voters, and he's very charismatic if he comes back from the stroke. So I think Democrats win this seat. I also think something people don't look enough about is currently the governor race. Essentially, Shapiro and Fetterman are running as a pair. Shapiro is overwhelmingly popular in the suburbs where I live. There's like signs everywhere. And he's very popular in the suburbs. He's also relatively popular in the city, which is something that Democrats are worried about with Fetterman. Meanwhile, Fetterman is extremely popular in the rural areas, and that's a really strong combo because now you hit all 3 of the areas you need to hit in Pennsylvania. You need the urban turnout for Democrats. You need the suburban swing voters, which Shapiro can, grab in. And then you need the, I guess, tough guy persona for the rural areas that Fetterman brings. And I think the Republican pairing is much weaker. Mastriano maybe can inspire the Trump base, but beyond that, considering he was endorsed by Trump and only managed 44% of the vote, I think that says everything you need to know. Yeah, and Oz is even worse. Oz literally could not get above 33% of the vote. So if Oz wins this race, I don't think it's the craziest thing in the world, but I think it's a very big shocker. Considering that Oz is not only polling behind, but had an abysmal primary campaign and realistically has failed to consolidate the Republican vote beyond the people who had already voted for him in the primary. Last but not least, the truest of true swing states right now, we have Nevada. Nevada has a Democratic incumbent, and I believe is the second likeliest Democratic incumbent to lose. In previous Senate races, you still had Democrats in Missouri, you had Democrats in Indiana, you had Democrats in Tennessee. All of those are gone. So realistically, Nevada and Georgia, until Manchin is up in West Virginia and Tester is up in Montana, and maybe Sherrod Brown in Ohio, those are the last 3 red states. Realistically, Georgia and Nevada are the states that Republicans can get the most out of at this point. And I think that Adam Wetzel, for all his faults, in the opinion of some of the left-wingers, I think that left-wing Democrats are really going to be shocked in this race because Catherine Cortez Masto has run not the best campaign to this point. She's very unpopular in Nevada. Meanwhile, Adam Laxalt essentially cleared the primary field after Trump endorsed him, and he's a very strong candidate in the state. I do think this 51-49, yep, I think that is exactly what it should be. I think maybe Cortez Masto still has a little bit of the victory, but look at these polls. Like, excluding this poll right here, which obviously there's something wrong there, there's no way Cortez Masto is winning with 21%. I think that this poll might have been like a poll with other Republican primary contenders. But yeah, I think that these +3, and +1, +3, like, this is going to be an insanely close race, and no one has ever thought it'd be more than 60% in one side's favor. So yeah, I think Democrats may be holding the House in a 50-50 margin, but there will be flips. That I think Pennsylvania is flipping Democrat, and I think that Georgia's flipping Republican. I think Nevada is realistically going to decide if the Senate stays Democratic or goes Republican. So yeah, thank you for watching, and I hope you enjoyed this video.